Sometimes it's questionable, isn't it? But no, the hug and howdy thing started a long time ago, where first little church I had, and I mean, there were just really not very many people there, and it was a rural church, and growing up on the farm and one thing like that, I mean, we were just kids. Julie and I were both, 19, I guess 19 when I started, 20 after we got married, and we got ready to leave there to move to Bloomington, Indiana, which, in fact, I just flew back in from. But when we got ready to go, and some of you have heard this before, but I don't mean to be redundant, but just to give you a perspective, but Lois and Doris hung around and hung around and hung around, and our last Sunday. And finally, just with tears in their eyes, whatever, and I said, look, y'all, I mean, I prayed about this, and it means a lot. They said, we just hate to see you go. And then they explained to me, he said, you've encouraged us with your sermons, but the thing we're going to miss more than anything else we were talking this morning is your hugs, because this is one place we knew we'd always get one. And our kids don't hug us anymore, and our grandkids don't hug us unless it's Christmas time. And so it really, really means a lot. And I had never thought about the value of that. I know some of you aren't into it, and I just encourage you to pray about it, because is it about being into it, or is it about being into people and what we're to do? And again, I think that there's caution to take, and there's respect to be given, and one thing like that. I mean, there's all kinds of hugs, and some of them border on, I don't know. It's just like some dogs. Some dogs are nice, they'll let you pet them, and some dogs just want to get in your lap, and some dogs don't know where to put their nose. So, it's kind of like that. So just be a little bit cautious, as you hug and everything that way. But that's what it came from. I mentioned I just flew back in. I want to thank you all that prayed, because there was everything that seemed to go wrong today, and my faith was tested. And as much as anything, I mean, just not like, it was close, life or death or anything that way. It was just that missing the plane type thing. And won't go into the whole detail, because it wouldn't make any difference, other than any of you that have ever flown know what it's like to be. I mean, I got up plenty early, but the plan just didn't work. And I didn't know it was fall break. And the airport there at Indy, usually pretty quick, in and out, 15, 20 minutes, you're checked in and through TSA. And today it wasn't that way. And I mean, it was on the line. And I just felt God saying, you going to practice what you preach? Because, I mean, the paranoia and the panic were coming and raising high. And I was just, about ready to be either mad or to cry, one or the other. Because it's like, God, what's this going on? And I thought, like, he doesn't know what's going on, And I was like, so really it kind of like boils down to, there's nothing I can do about this. And he's pretty much, so if anything's going to happen, it's going to happen because of you. Yep. And I got to my gate, and in fact got in the wrong line at the gate at Southwest. They have those lines, and so made a total fool of myself. They put those gates so close together, but I got in the one for Phoenix, and found out that I was in the wrong line, because she scanned my barcode, or whatever that is, the QRT, QWERTY or whatever, but scanned that thing and said, you need to go to Atlanta, not to Phoenix, I think. So nonetheless, made it here, and in spite of everything going on in Atlanta, waiting on bags and stuff, but I trust and presume that for that reason, it's not that I've got something great to say, it's that God, I hope, has something great to say. And it's not coming, it may be coming through my mouth, but I hope that it's coming from heaven. And to see that that happens, if you will, let's pray. God and Father, just plain and simply, man, we think we're in such control. And the truth is, most of us can look at our lives and go, whoa, if it was up to me, there's a lot that's out of control. And God, I wonder how much of our life we spend on things that we can't really do anything about. And whether it's worldwide or our nation, or whether it's even local, or whether it's the weather or that's good, or the weather that's bad, or it's too hot, it's too cold. God, it's just amazing the things that I honestly believe the devil can get us focused on, so we quit thinking about you. And yet, Lord, I pray that we'd become the people that would allow those frustrations and those times of paranoia or panic to go ahead and just turn us to your throne. And it's just amazing how, Lord, when we start praising you, how the burdens lift. And Jesus, I remember singing the old song, burdens are lifted at Calvary. And truly, the biggest burden of sin is. And if you can take it and take death, Lord, what is it you can't handle? If you've taken care of my soul, what is my body? And why would I wonder? And Jesus, no wonder you taught those that followed you. And thankfully, we've got it written down for us, that we don't need to be anxious about anything, just pray about everything. That not worry, because you've got things handled. If we seek you and your kingdom first, the rest of the things will fall into place. And God, I just wish we were better record keepers, because we tend to be not like 1 Corinthians 13 with the love chapter. which says love keeps no record of wrongs. We tend to keep a lot of records of wrongs, and we don't keep enough records of rights and things that you did for us, Lord, not that we deserve, but just those times that you intervened and almost in miraculous, if not completely miraculous ways, you make things happen. And God, so why don't we just find ourselves comfortable in your arms and not wait until it's just that right day with just the right temperature and everything's going our way and we got all the right people around us, God. Might we instead be all right if we know that you're around us and in us. And Jesus, thank you for making that possible. And because of that, I pray that you, through the power of your Spirit, Lord, that you would speak through me today, that there isn't an accident that we just happen to be here, but there's something that we're each to get. And God, I'm not smart enough to put together any kind of a message to try to hold people's attention for however many minutes it would be today, but God, the big thing is that they don't miss the moments that you catch their attention. And so I just ask that you would bless these folks as they think, as they have their minds and hearts open, God, and you can handle our scrutiny and all, but may we also allow you at times just to kind of just, like the rain today, soak into us, that we could be comfortable in your presence and not demanding of you and asking you to be our slave, but us even getting to the point we surrender as your servants. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So the story of Joseph, we're to chapter 39, running through this very rapidly here. And Joseph was sold by his brothers after being despised by them. Their hatred and all built up to the point that they just decided to do away with him, really wanted to kill him, but found a better deal because he's worth more dead than alive. But they took the report back to their dad, and he believed he was dead because they showed him the ripped up and blood-stained coat that he'd always worn that was his special one that they despised as well. And I just, kind of wish sometimes, and maybe I picked up stuff from my wife after years and years of, well, then what? Or what about this and what about that? I kind of really wish we had more what-abouts here with Joseph, because I'd like to know what about it. What was it like being tossed into the well? And as I mentioned last week, was it that thing of they're just kidding and realizing, no, they're not? Was it that thing of, holy smokes, what in the world's going on? God, how can this be happening? Was Joe a guy that was soft because his dad favored him so much? Or was he really tenacious? Was he smart and strong-willed in his mind? Or was he strong even with his arms? I don't know. He was a shepherd, and most of the shepherds, they weren't just wimpy kind of guys. David was one that went up against Goliath, And it wasn't because he was so big and bulked up and huge. His brothers were older and bigger than he was, but he had this thing in his heart. And I think that's what draws us to these people, that outside of Joseph, most all of them we can quickly see their flaws, because God was willing to, in his book, in history of the people that he loved, he was willing to show us beyond a shadow of a doubt, not just faithful people, fault-filled people. They all had faults. And that's the part that ought to intrigue us, because what he's trying to say in all of it is, I'll use you. On Wednesday night, we've been going through Revelation. I've stopped for a moment to look at, because heaven's talked about with the 12 gates, and the 12 gates are the 12 tribes. And man, when you go back and look at the 12 tribes of Jacob, the 12 sons that he had, they were pretty flawed. They weren't exactly stoic and super spiritual. The oldest one, Reuben, ended up sleeping with one of his dad's wives. Whoops. And then we know that even Judah, didn't go ahead and fulfill what he should have done with his sons and daughter-in-law and everything in that regard, and he ends up sleeping with his daughter-in-law. Now, he thought she was just a prostitute. That makes it a lot better, But when you see all this happening, and yet Jacob, man, Judah is the tribe that Jesus came from. And ironically, through the seed of this woman, Tamar, that slept with her father-in-law. And I mention that because some people think the Bible's boring. Well, it's like, I don't know which Bible you're reading, but that's not very boring stuff. It's soap opera stuff. But I share it with you, and the reason I think that Jesus shows us in Revelation that these gates, the way into heaven, to get through the gate, that he had these 12 tribes listed to show us, number one, I use infallible people, or I use fallible people, I use people that are fault-filled. And I just want you to understand that it doesn't mean that that's okay and anything goes. It's just that there's nothing that I can't overcome if you have faith in me. And so this faithfulness is what it's about. And that's believing in nothing. And we all have faith. We have it from the practical ways of faith in electricity and faith in our cars and faith in brakes and one thing and like that. I mean, we use all kinds of things we don't know. We even have faith when we sign, I agree on every app that you buy and everything that you do on your computer, right? Because who's going to read all that stuff, you know? And on top of it, I got to use the thing, right? So we have faith in a lot of things, but I think we even have faith, even greater faith, in the unseen things that cause fear and trembling inside of us. We have faith in the world, and some right now, their faith is they believe that the world's going to disappear and it's all coming to pieces because of greenhouse gases. And I know I can oversimplify, and some of you be mad, and I know that some of you go, you take that really serious, and it's like, no, man, I know the Bible tells me it's going to be destroyed. God told that a long time ago. But it's not going to be because some cow farted. It's going to be because God said it's done, man. It's done. And, you know, like I've said before, too, at least from my time, a little bit of stuff in school, you know, that the center of the core of the earth is this hot lava, and we know there's also natural gas down there, and there's also oil. That looks to me like a pretty good one of those cocktails, you know, that they throw with the flaming thing going out of it. I mean, this place is designed to blow up. And so we can be afraid and put our faith into all these fear-mongering and everything that's going to go wrong. And I mean, there are things wrong, and there are some things going to go wrong, but the big thing is, am I in the midst of somebody else's wrongs making and doing anything right? Am I putting more faith in them and all this, you know, anxiety, or am I putting my faith in God and finding peace, the peace that he promised? And that's your choices. So back to Joseph, you say, what's this got to do with you and me and Joe? Well, it's this. I mean, he's not only now been thrown away, he got back out of there, but it wasn't so they could say, just kidding. It was because he's suddenly being turned over to these guys that he doesn't even know who they are. And it's a caravan, and I can only imagine. I mean, I don't know whether they have only stuff like spices or if they've got all kinds of stuff. For me, it would have driven my sensitivity to smells and everything like that nuts with just the myrrh and the aloes and the spices and stuff. I'd probably been going wacko there. But Joseph's suddenly getting the picture as they count out the silver, and he's being chained up. I don't even know if the man's got clothes. I know they took his robe. I don't know what was on underneath the robe. But I know he wasn't prepared to take a journey, and he didn't even have any idea where he was going, and he didn't know the people he was around, and maybe didn't even know the language they were speaking. I mean, it's difficult to know what was going on, and I got a feeling that, and maybe most of it's just because you and I have all seen TV and movies and stuff, but you know, I got a feeling that they didn't treat him very nice. I don't think it was like, hey, welcome to the nice club that we've got here. You know, because why would they have him tied up if that's the case? And then we don't know if he was in which part of the parade he was in. I doubt he was at the front, but was he like the poor guys at the end after the band and the horses? You know, I mean, was that the end of he was on? I don't know. But I can only imagine if it was me, I'd be going, what the crud is going on here? Man, I have no idea. And anxiety could have just filled him to the brim and over. I mean, I'm not going to do this. You can resist all you want, but you're somewhat captive now. You've been sold. Yeah, but I didn't sign the deed. It doesn't make any difference. You're sold. What kind of slave am I going to be? I'm going to be a slave to these people or whatever. Well, I'm sure he had chores that he had to do. I don't know how long it took him to go from here down to Egypt. A few days, I would guess at least, maybe longer. It depends on the other stops they had to make, the dealings they had to do, because these guys were traders. And so they're taking and they're buying low to go down to Egypt and sell high. And so Joseph finally arrives at Egypt, and guess what he finds? He gets sold again. What was he thinking? I don't know. I can't help but wonder, did he remember the dream? Did he have to choose, was that my dream and my imagination, or was that really a dream from God? And how does this fit into that? There's no way that this could possibly be what God had in mind, but anybody that's read ahead knows it was. In fact, one of the things that we did in this study, going back and looking at the tribes, was God even told Abraham before he had a kid, God even told Abraham, he said, man, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be so many people coming out of you. Kings and nations are going to come out of you. And Abraham's like, I don't have any kids. This is impossible. But God said it would happen. And the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore and all this stuff. And then he told Abraham, he said, and there's going to come a point in time where they're going to be in a foreign land and they're going to become slaves. And after 400 years, I'll get them out. 400 years. Whoa, man, that's a long time. And the people didn't live that long at this point in time. They used to. That's half a life. You know, you're about like being in your 40s. But at this point in time, people died. And I'm just sure that for me, if I was Abraham, that'd be a little bit overwhelming. Well, God, how's that good? But you see, God's got a plan. And faith believes God knows what he's doing. Is that thank you, got one. One's certain God has a plan. Some are wondering if God's got a plan. And you may be in the midst of going, if this is his plan, I'm not sure I like it. But that's what I'm saying is I think that we don't take faith far enough. We want to have just a mental assent that there's a God, and we want to believe as long as we do good, God's going to take us there because we're not bad enough to have to go to hell. And last I read, it said one sin, that's what you do. You pay for your own sins with death. Otherwise, Jesus, we take his blood, and it pays for our sins and for our death, and we get to live as we die to ourselves. So this story of Joseph, I just wonder what it was like in the midst of this. And I've got a feeling that he, just like every one of us that's in any kind of bondage, has one or two choices. The one choice is to get down and depressed and give up. And the other is to go down on your knees and look up. Not give up, just look up. And say, God, if you've brought it to this point in time, you're not unaware of it. And I don't know whether it's out of my foolishness this happened or out of your providence that this happened, but I'm going to choose to believe you can use this. And that's what faith does. Faith just trusts God can use what? Anything. And if we've repented of our sins, he can even use that. For what? For good. Because remember that little saying that we've all heard and read 100 times and we don't like people telling us that? Don't forget, God's working all things. I wonder if Joseph had anybody, God's probably working all things to the good, Joe. But, we don't like that if somebody tells us that way, but why don't we remind ourselves of that? Hey, God's still working, and he will take every single element that he can and bring it together to bring good as a result of it. But what's the big and ultimate good? Saved lives. Not just in this world. No, saved lives eternally is what he was actually getting towards. But before we go on, we can look at this because I've got to give you at least a little bit of Bible here with Joseph, right? So chapter 39, Joseph was taken down to Egypt, verse 1 says. Potiphar, and I don't know, maybe it's Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of the Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. Wonder what kind of a deal he got. Like I said, buy low, sell high. And so these guys don't care who gets it. And I wonder, in the midst of this, was God involved? I don't know. I'd like to think so. But if I'm going to think that God was involved in this, that God would be involved in my life. And this morning he certainly showed me he was, because, like I said, things that I was trying to do, even though I was on time and everything else, weren't working out well. And I wonder if I'd have kept going on in my stew and my stir and all this frustration that I had, I wonder if I'd still be up there in the airport trying to get another flight down here. But rather instead, I decided that I had a choice, and really it was not much of a big deal choice. It was either stay frustrated or say, God's got this. And I can't begin to tell you how. It just, the peace that came as soon as I said, I'm going to turn it over to you then, because I'm pretty powerless in this, and turn it over to, can't believe the peace that I had. Then I can't believe when I walked out of that TSA and saw where I was and what kind of time I got through. Because it was one of those that they lie to you like they do down here in Atlanta. Oh, stand in this line, it's only this many minutes. Yeah, right, you and whatever else. Come on. It was at least twice as long as they said, but nonetheless, I made it. And you say, well, okay, you got your little miracle today, Steve, big deal. No, I'm just saying I think God does little miracles in all of our lives. It is a big deal. All the time. I think there's times that he honestly blocks us from being someplace because he knows the disaster that was awaiting. I know I've read people on September 11th that time that didn't make it to work. One guy didn't get there because he had a blister on his foot from his new shoes, and he had to stop and get a Band-Aid, and he got delayed. And he's all frustrated till he realized what he avoided, and then he felt kind of that remorse, because why wasn't I there? I know there's all kinds of things, and you see, that's one thing that you and I can't begin to predict, all the variables in our lives. The germs that come in, the germs that God blocks that don't even come in because our systems couldn't handle it, the things that God allows our system to handle, the colds that are frustrating and one thing like that. But if we didn't get that and get our system built up, what God might be, what he may have saved us from, because we could have got the germ that would have killed us. I'm just saying, guys, in all this, if you're going to believe in God, don't just believe him in the one little thing, God will save my soul. Why don't you believe in him all the way through and say, God cares about me? Because if he really is, as Jesus said, willing and wanting to be our Father in heaven, I don't know a good dad that doesn't care about everything that their kids do. I said a good dad. I don't know a good dad that doesn't care about everything. I don't know a good mother that doesn't care about everything. And I know even at my age, my mom still prays for me because she knows that I've got that thing in me, you know, that sometimes it's just that get out there on the edge a little bit too far, drive a little too fast, do whatever it is. So my mom still prays for me because she's concerned. She really gets worried when we get home because she goes right back into that thing back, 40 years ago when we had a curfew. And it's like, if you're in my house, you got a curfew. You got to tell me where you're going, when you're going to be back, but you better be back by this time. You can't just be out there, things happen. It's like, man. And I can get frustrated about it, or I can say, thanks, Mom, you still care. Now, if God's got a plan, and God cares about the details, which he does, even to the extent of having Jesus go through his bloodline, go through Tamar, who wasn't exactly a stellar woman, posing as a prostitute to sleep with her father-in-law, all kinds of weird kinked up stuff there. And he goes from there to the point that guess who the next lady in line is that really is a surprise? And she's called, that was Tamar. The next one's called Rahab. Guess what she was? Prostitute. Does God love prostitutes? You better believe he does. Better believe he does. And I don't mean from that, hey, it's okay by me. But he loves, just like he loves any one of us. In spite of what we are, what we do, what we've been, he wants to love us into him. Because of her faith that she showed, God showed faithfulness back to her, and she's in the bloodline of Jesus Christ. Phenomenal. And when you go back through and read those boring genealogies, that's some of the fun stuff that comes through it. The other one that's really a shock and a surprise, we all know about David fighting Goliath. What's the other thing David did? He killed somebody. But before he did that, sex was on his mind. And he had an illicit affair with Bathsheba. And not only did he sleep with her, but he got her pregnant. And then to cover up the pregnancy, he killed her husband. Had him killed. And guess who's in the bloodline of Jesus Christ? Her. Why didn't he pick one of Solomon's other 700 wives or concubines? Don't know. But God's got a plan. And I'm sharing all this with you so that you would begin to process, and I hope every one of us is thinking for a minute, am I in the bloodline of Christ? Should be. We should be his descendants in faithfulness, and we ought to all be recipients of his blood. But then if we are we reproducing? We should be. Jesus said, if you're part of me and you bear, you're grafted in and you become a part of the vine, you remain in me, you will bear what kind of fruit? Much fruit. Good fruit. And if you don't, I'll cut you off and throw you to the side. Because there's no use letting you take up the juice if you're not going to go ahead and do something with it. And that's where I don't think that we've taught enough about that evangelism is our thing. Every one of us. It's about reaching out and telling others what Jesus did for us. Now, there are bad ways to do it. But this whole weekend, I found different ways to express God's faithfulness. And opportunities to tell people or whatever. And I didn't just pull out the preacher card and go to it that way. But sharing with people what I've seen God do. Calling an individual whose mom and dad were very, very concerned about their child and the wayward life, what's been happening or whatever. And I went ahead then and felt compelled, and I asked for her cell and text her, and it turned into several texts back and forth. And what difference does it make? I don't know. If it's your daughter, what difference would it make? You see, he's working. But it's not through just preachers. It's through his family. And we're all like Joseph in the sense that I think sometimes we get a little chained up and we're so preoccupied with all the oh my's that we forget about the oh wows that God gives us. And as we forget about that, we just start living our own life, which brings me to this thing about what was it like for Joseph? He gets sold. It just happens to be Potiphar. Potiphar just happens to be a hierarchy and this Egyptian army deal. So, I mean, on one hand, that's cool. On the other hand, that's something to be feared, but he probably had a pretty nice house. And in this pretty nice house, then, Joseph starts out, and I'm sure he started at the bottom, maybe washing dishes, washing floors, whatever it would be, but he works his way up to the next thing. You know, what's amazing is that he's over the whole house. But it's because this Potiphar happens to notice something. And if you will, let's see what it says there in verse 2. It said, the Lord was with Joseph. Now, I could tell you from the scriptures that for everybody here that's a believer, that's accepted Jesus Christ and received Christ and met him on his terms, not your own, his, I would tell you that his promise is, I will be with you. How long? Forever. How long? Even to the end of the age. Even till you die. That's how long he's promised to be with us. So, the Lord being with Joseph is no different than the Lord being with you. But here's my question. Do you reflect the presence of God enough that people notice? Because notice what happened here. The Lord was with Joseph and he prospered. He lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant, his personal attendant. Potiphar then put him in charge of his whole household, and he trusted his care to his care everything that he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything that Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So he left Joseph in care of everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he didn't concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Now, how did that happen? Did God make Joseph lucky? No, I believe it's because Joseph remained faithful. I'll tell you one thing, that if you're around people very long, it doesn't take you too long to recognize people that you go, I think I'll just stay over here on this side, because they either have the prickly things like a porcupine, saying, stay away from me, I'll stick you. Or they look like the wicked witch of the north or the west, or whichever one it was in Wizard of Oz, or my little pretty. So there's just some people that put off this attitude that, okay, I don't want to get mixed up with that. And then there are people that, man, you're just drawn to because they're open and they're peaceful. I don't think that Joseph copped an attitude in the midst of his slavery. I don't think he focused on what all was wrong and, man, I'm going to get my brothers or anything else. I think that he continued to allow God to be with him, and he just decided to grow where he was planted. And I share that with you because you and I, every one of us, got the same choice. We can resist where we're at, or we can go ahead, we can resent where we're at, or we can go ahead and represent God where we're at. And Joseph's attitude, I'm fully convinced, is what really drew people to him. And part of that attitude, that's what's amazing, was he lived up to his job. He was a good slave. Now, I'm going to likely get myself into where people will misunderstand this, and I don't want it misunderstood. I don't want anything that I'm about to say to be taken out of context, because I think it's important that we look at it. It has to do with slavery. And certainly there's some very, very cruel things that have happened in regard to slavery. And I would encourage you, if you're going to, don't just read the highlights, but do some historical reading if you can. Don't go to Wikipedia, but go to some older books and read about slavery. Because there are stories written of slaves that really did love their masters. They appreciated them. They lived in harmony with them. There are some people that were sold as slaves because they went to debtor's prison and they were bought out of it. Others that owed people, and so they would say, I can't pay you, but I'll work for you the rest of my life. And so there's a variety of things with slavery that go on. Now, today, one of the biggest things, and we're here in the heart of it with Atlanta, is the sex trafficking and the slavery that's involved with that. And the obvious connotation, it's very difficult to point out I don't know anybody that's enjoying that, other than the people that are just the perverts that are enjoying it in that regard. But here you're taking vulnerable teenagers and then keeping them either locked up or keeping them drugged up to the point they don't even know what they're doing. And some of those stories are pretty horrendous that come out. So am I for slavery? Not in that kind. Nor am I in the kind that you just, because you're bigger, you take people to make them do whatever you want them to do. But the reason I want to look at slavery is to understand that there are different sides of it. And one of the things that, to I think understand it, that what we've got to look at then is maybe recognize in our own life where we're either enslaved or maybe there are people that we hold as slaves. Not necessarily physically, but with either the words that we use or our actions or our threats. The other part is that ultimately, I mean, at least this isn't me going and reading what other people have said. This is just straight from Steve. And not that that makes it worth anything. But as I tried to look at this, the deal with Joseph here, man, was he bound? How limited was he? What did he have for clothes? Did he try to escape? Did he look for ways to escape? Did he ask to be let go? Did he keep asking how? How come you're doing this? Where are you taking me? What are you going to do with me? Was he panicked? Was he filled with fears? Or did he reside to the fact that he could pray, and if something was going to be done, he'd let God do it? Now, the other side of slavery is freedom. And we've all been taught that, that's what America is, right? The land of the brave and the home of the free, or whichever way it goes. And, which is good. But it's strange when you read our Constitution and you read the Declaration of Independence and one thing like that it didn't take very long to where they had to put together kind of a Bill of Rights. And the reason they had to put that together was because there were some people doing whatever they felt like doing. It was infringing upon other people. And a part of this nation being free was the understanding that it's not free to do everything you want to do. It's free to pursue your happiness, as long as it doesn't take away from somebody else's happiness. I think that's pretty wise. But the funny thing is, true freedom means I can do whatever I want to do, whenever I want to do it. I can go where I want to go, whenever I want to go. And that's what true freedom is. And there are some people that still believe that that's what it is. I thought back about when did I first realize I was a slave. And I clearly remember my brothers, not my youngest one, he wasn't old enough, but my other brother, Mark, and my two sisters. We kind of got our heads together, and we pretty much came up to the conclusion that Mom and Dad had us just so that we could be their slaves. Few of you too, right? How many parents in here had kids so that they would become your slaves? How many parents in here, at least you're honest, how many parents in here became slaves when you had kids? See, that's the most amazing thing, because when we're born into this world, in spite of how spectacular we are and people taking our picture and everything else, I mean, you don't even have to do selfies when you're a baby because, man, everybody does it for you. But you're completely dependent as can be. You're enslaved at birth because there's not one darn thing you can do for yourself other than cry and make messes. Outside of that, you are completely dependent on everybody else for taking care of you, feeding you, going ahead and making sure they feed you what you need, getting this done, that done, whatever it may be, I mean, you are completely dependent upon others or you don't live. But as that transitions, the first thing that we start running into is we start fighting for this independence. And this group that Ashley and Eric are putting together, man, I encourage you to go to it. It is the best series I've ever seen on marriage, this love and respect thing. It is worth your while. And like she said in the video there, even if you've got a great marriage, it will not hurt it, it will improve it. But the thing that goes on is that we suddenly get to this point, and a lot of kids hit it, pretty early in grade school, and maybe some of them even before that, but it's when you want to dress yourself and do what you want to do. I mean, it's so fun for me to see some of the kids come through, and I can tell which ones dress themselves certain days, Not only can the shoes be on the opposite feet, that's fine. I mean, if that's the way you want them, you say, hey, your shoe's on the wrong foot. No, it's not. Okay. Hey, those colors don't go, or those stripes and those plaids, but they dress like old men. Sometimes they just put them together, And it's colors, whatever. I mean, but what that is, there's a part of it that's good because they're starting to realize and they have choices. But there's another part of it is, if you feed that little monster, and I'm not talking about your kid, I'm talking about this monster of pride, this monster of freedom that I just want to do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it, and you never limit it, it becomes obnoxious. At the very best, it's spoiled rotten. And I share that with you because I think it's vital that we think about it, because I didn't think about that. I learned the limitations because I had a strong enough mom and dad that we couldn't do whatever we wanted to do whenever we wanted to do it. And when we tried, we lost. They won. We lost. But, it begins to then create friction and factions pretty quickly when we just do whatever we want whenever we want to do it, or we argue about everything that's happening. And I had my elbows out fighting for my independence so hard that when I got married, especially when Julie and I were both fairly young, I mean, she was still 19, I was 20, but when we got married, I didn't even realize I was still fighting for my independence, and so was she in our marriage. Because we didn't want anybody else telling us what to do. We wanted to do what we wanted to do when we wanted to do it. But now, it just depended which one it was from whose perspective, how that materialized and looked. But it was thanks to God that came to the realization that, wait a minute, man, it's real easy to give off mixed messages. I mean, guys, we're pretty good at saying, hey, come closer. It's not that close. Well, come on, come close. No, not that close. We want one part closer to us. We want the other part to stay clear away. Part that reminds us of mom can stay clear away, but we just want the girlfriend part, right? And that's just weird, but we fight for this independence. I was not very good when I had my own car, and some of you know the story there about when Dad gave my keys to my car to my sister because of a certain speeding ticket that I got. And not for a day, not for a weekend, not for a week, but for an entire month. And I didn't have any say in it. I didn't think that was fair. So now not only do I not have quite the independence that I thought that I wanted, but on top of it then, even the freedom that I thought that I had that was mine, that I'd purchased, was suddenly under the control of somebody else. And it lasted way too long. I mean, I didn't intentionally, but there was a period there of 2 to 3 years that I was at the house and in the family, but I wasn't a part of it. One reason, right here. You can think all you want, and unless you're so stinking independent and wealthy, there's not anybody here that's free to the point you can do whatever you want whenever you want to do it. When you do, you're the one that's going to get hurt, along with the shrapnel that hurts others too. I didn't know how miserable I was making my family, but part of it was because Mom and Dad were just determined enough. Dad, I think, telling Mom that, just let it go. Just let it go. We're going to keep on. If he chooses to stay isolated, we can't do anything about it. Now, I didn't have any choice about staying in my room. I didn't have any choice about this or that, but I'd go to the table. I'd be polite, but I didn't want anything to do really with the family because I felt like I had been ripped off and nobody made any apologies to me. And I didn't consider myself to be a spoiled brat. But even in the midst of a family that disciplined, I still was acting like one. And I share that with you because I think that that's where we keep coming back to. That's our nature. That's this sinful nature. It's Adam and Eve being told, you can have all the trees and all the garden, man. Eat all you want. Just leave this one alone. And which one did they have to have? That one. Who told them? Well, Satan. And what did he tell them? God just doesn't want you to be like him. Now there's something to gain because we want equality. We want to be bigger. We want to be better. We don't want anybody on top of us. Man, I wonder how many times that Adam's been back there trying to put that fruit up on the tree. because he just didn't realize what was going to come as a result of it. Now, in the midst of all this freedom and slavery thing, then what I want you to think about and I want you to consider, because if the truth is that none of us can honestly afford to be really 110% completely free, then we need to pick the things that we can be free with, and then we need to then share with others, because what I found was, again, I hurt my family, but I hurt me. I don't know about you all, but pouting is a miserable feeling. You ever done it? I know girls love it in the bathroom. That's what Joyce Meyer says. That, you go in and just work up a real pout and mad. And the world's so cruel. And I just, man, you can eventually cry if you keep it going, But we will too, guys, but we do it where nobody can see us. We don't even have to see ourselves in the mirror. We go out and we start throwing stuff around. And the amazing thing is, what real freedom is being free up here. And there's all kinds of good books written by people that were in, whether it be prison or in closed down societies, or very limited with what they could do, that live free. I know the one that I read that one time was about the POW. It was amazing that he went ahead and every day he played 18 holes of golf. He was a POW. What do you mean? In his mind. He went to his favorite golf course, imagined the first tee, warmed up, struck the ball, saw it land. He'd even occasionally mishit one, because he did. But when he got out, within a few weeks of getting out of a POW camp, he went out and played that course. And I don't know, I don't remember exactly, but I want to say he shot within 2 or 3 strokes of par. And hadn't played golf for years. But he was beaten and imprisoned in a POW camp. But you see, he was there, but he was free. This book we have at the end of our book, that a lot of people, the devil's buffaloed you out of reading, is the greatest love story there is. It's called Revelation. It's a revelation of Jesus Christ to his church, saying, I will do what I said I will do. I'm worth waiting on and waiting for. I've got plans, and I'll take you when you're done with the plans. But I've got a plan that you won't believe, and a place that you can't even begin to conceive. But I'll give you pictures of it nonetheless. And who wrote that book of Revelation for Jesus? A guy named John. And where was John? In prison on the Isle of Patmos. So not only in a prison, but exiled on an island. But he was free. Free enough to dream for God and to write what God showed him. He was caught up in the Spirit. That's where I can quickly see I'm running out of time here today, because that's what I want to encourage you guys to do, is to begin to pray and say, God, who is this Holy Spirit you've given me? Because it's the Spirit that kept Jesus on track in spite of the fact numerous times Jesus had plenty to be frustrated with. The Pharisees were continually trying to embarrass him and cut him down, to make fun of his disciples, to try to disintegrate his teaching, to make him as though he were some kind of a false god. They accused him of all kinds of things. And yet Jesus was the perfect one. How did he stay free? Because the Spirit continued to lead him, not focusing on what he couldn't do, but on what he could do and should do next. Because you see, the Spirit's not chained, not prohibited unless we do it. But the Spirit will give us life. He's a life-giving Spirit. He will lead us in truth. He wants to bring us closer to God. He wants us to discover that the way then to love God is to serve God, and the way to serve God is to serve each other. And that's the amazing thing about it, is that we believe we know more than God knows, and we don't believe that serving is cool. We think it's a job. And the whole truth of the matter is, man, we're all slaves, aren't we? We're slaves to something. We're slaves, Jesus told us, be careful. Can't serve two what? Masters. You love one, hate the other, or be devoted to one, despise the other. You can't serve, and he made it clear, God and money. But man, We all have done a lot of things to get money, haven't we? And yet, money can help us if we're sick, but it can't buy us health. It can't buy us more life. It can make life more fun. But if it's an essential, we're going to miss out. I had several passages here that I wanted to share with you, and I don't want to miss the freedoms that can lead to slavery. At least want to share this because I've had quite a bit of time to think about this. I'm not saying that makes it good, but I feel like it was what I was supposed to share with you today. Freedom can lead to slavery. We can become slaves to our ambitions, slaves to our friends. We can become slaves to cheating, to drinking, getting high, having sex, sleeping in. You could even be a slave to work. And one of the biggest ones that I think today is not just for teens, it's for all of us, the electronic media slavery, right? How much time and what we've got to have. Can't live without it type of deal. There's all kinds of things we can become slaves to. We can become slaves to fashion, slaves to trying to keep up with other people. And then I mention all that to do is because in the midst of it, what we've got to guard is if we're not careful, we go from exercising our freedom into becoming slaves. And when you go into becoming a slave, what's real easy then to do is to get to the point that you don't even know whose control you're under. But my good friends have taught me that it's just like Christianity. That you come to your senses when you say, I am powerless against certain things. Lord, I need your help. And those of us that know Jesus Christ, he's more than just a higher power. He's the Son of God. He's our Savior. And if we're ever going to get out of slavery, it's going to be because of him. I had a variety of passages to write for you, and as Cale and the guys come up, because I know we're out of time, it's difficult for me to pick one, so let me try here with 2 Peter chapter 2. Because I wanted to share with you, and if you want, you can write this one down and go back and read it in John 21. It's where Jesus talks to Peter about, do you love me, do you love me, do you love me? And the third time that Peter said, of course I love you. And Jesus said, there's coming a day when somebody's going to dress you and take you where you don't want to go. In other words, you're not going to any longer be in control. They're going to be in control. You're going to be enslaved. And he shares that with him, and Peter sees it as a negative, and Jesus was trying to tell him and said, same thing they did to me. Because the truth is, Jesus was sold as a slave before Peter was. And Jesus, in many regards, can relate a lot, I believe, with Joseph and what he went through. But he was mistreated that night, wasn't he? And killed off of false testimony. And even allowed to be killed by a person in charge that knew but didn't do anything about it. But Peter writes for us, the same one that's going to be led away. And some of you have heard, those of you that don't know, aren't told in the scriptures, but we're told by some of the historians that Peter died standing up for Jesus Christ. He didn't give in, didn't back down, wouldn't deny Christ again, even though he'd done it before. But when he died, they went to crucify him. And so they had him chained up and everything. And Peter said, I have one request. Don't give me the dignity that my Lord and Savior had. Crucify me upside down. Peter was free. He was no longer enslaved to his own passions, his own pride. He'd given it up. He was free because he believed that Jesus was worth living for and dying for. And you see, that's the amazing thing, is that to really become free, you've got to die. And I'm not talking about just physically, although physical death does free you up from a lot of things, if you know where you're going anyway. But it's dying to ourselves that we begin to live for Christ. And it's choosing to let him be the one we serve instead of serving ourselves, which is ultimately, in many regards, serving the devil. Well, this same Peter here talked about false prophets, and he said, these are the men that are springs without water. Verse 17, sorry, bro. Mist driven by storm. Blackest darkness is reserved for them, for they mouth empty, boastful words, and by appealing to the lustful desires of sinful human nature, they entice people that are just escaping from those who live in error. He's saying the false prophets and untrue biblical teaching is what misleads people. He said they promise them freedom while they themselves are slaves of depravity. For a man is a slave to whatever has mastered him. That's my encouragement to you for an assignment this week. I'll not grade your paper or anything else. But I want to encourage you to spend the week saying, God, what all has mastered me? Who do I serve? And how often do I serve them or it? A man is a slave to whatever has mastered him. If they've escaped the corruption of the world by knowing our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and are again entangled in it and overcome, they're worse off at the end than they were at the beginning. So today, if you're here and you know that you want to go to heaven, then the biggest thing is man saying, God, what is it that entangles me? What have I been mastered by, or what am I about to be gobbled up by? Set me free, because I don't want to get to the point that I'm worse off than I was at the beginning, right? And so this invitation is a chance, an opportunity for you to pray, to praise, to thank God, to say, Lord, help me with my mind just to live free, no matter what I'm stuck in. Let me begin to believe that you've got a purpose for every single thing going on in my life. That there's not one thing happening, because I promise you that, not one thing happening to you or to me that he's not aware of. And the things that he doesn't like, it's not because he hates us, it's because he knows it's harmful for us. He wants us to really be free. And that's why he said that if you follow him and his teaching, you'll be free indeed. So let's stand and let's respond as he leads. What do you say?
I'm caught up in your bed.